Black America. What will this require? Is Black business prospering? Are we reaching women and minority-owned businesses? How do we achieve earning parity for wealth for our families? Do our children really have access to education? Will our families have choices for our children? Prison pipelines, mass incarceration, tearing our families apart. A healthcare system not accessible to the masses. The disproportionate termination of Black women from corporate America. When will we actually begin to address what's really at play? How do Black people gain more power to help make these changes? This requires a lot of political will and courage. I'm that provocateur of change. I am Cindi Bright. Welcome to HeartBeat. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to HeartBeat. I am your host, Cindi Bright. Thank you for joining us this evening. If you joined us last week, you saw we had a fabulous show as we are beginning debriefing legislative session for 2024. And we had Senator Patty Kuderer on last week, who's running for the Office of Insurance Commissioner. And I got a lot of really good feedback about that show. The interesting people were happy to get to see her, to know her, to learn about that particular seat. And tonight we are going to have another great show because we are all women on here having conversations each week. And of course, we're going to talk about our children tonight. And so we are doing this evening's show on education and what is happening here in Washington State. Now, I was looking at some data, some statistics today about the public education system here in Washington State and kind of where we rank. And I was looking at the 2023 numbers, and it looks like we are down to 31st out of 50 states. So we are below the half mark. We're in a global economy that we've got to be competitive. And so we need to focus on education for our kids. Now, a lot of people don't agree with me on some of my own views about education. I'm a very strong proponent of education, both public and private. It's personal to me. It was a goal in my own family to make sure my own son got educated. I'm out of the business world. I got to see firsthand what lack of education did, particularly in Brown and Black communities and to Brown and Black people. And so when you hear me talking about education, I talk about it as a necessity. I also aim to change the narrative or the way that we talk about education as a way to get jobs. And I don't want to talk about it in that sense. I want to talk about education leads to careers, which leads to prosperity. Now, there's nothing wrong with every one of us having jobs, but in our community, to gain to higher levels of prosperity, we do need to focus on our children and having them educated. And there's a range, or there are so many issues that go on in early learning, their early years, a lot to unpack and talk about them. So we're happy to have two of our senators here this evening. Before I introduce them in, let me bring in Erin Jones, who is here with me tonight co-hosting this. Erin is a staunch education person. She's education consultant. She's actually ran for the Office of Public Instruction. Is that what the OPSI stands for, Erin? I think you're muted.
Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction.
That's what it is. And that seat is up for election right now. So we're going to be talking more with the community about that particular seat here in the weeks to come, because it's an important race to pay attention to as well. Let's welcome in two of our senators. I'm really excited to have them. They've both been on HeartBeat before. Let's first welcome in Senator Lisa Wellman. She's out of the 41st district. I had it in error when I posted it as 45th. She's out of the 41st. She is the chair of the Early Learning and K-12 Education System. Welcome back to HeartBeat, Senator Wellman.
Thank you so much.
Let's welcome in Senator Claire Wilson. Happy to have you back, Senator Wilson. She is also are you the co-chair or the vice chair of Early Learning in K through 12? And so you both just did quite a bit in session this last couple of months. And I was saying to you before we came live that I was going through all of your bills and I was looking at all the things that you tackle. Why don't we start with letting each of you introduce yourselves, kind of what your role is as a senator, and particularly on these committees, and then give us some high level of some of these bills that you work on and some of the things that you're proud of being accomplished this session. We can start with you, Senator Wellman.
Thank you. To your point, I am elected by the 41st Legislative District, but it's very important for me to think of that my constituents are 1.5 million kiddos in the state of Washington. And I feel like I get up every day to make sure that they have what they need to thrive in a 21st century digital economy, which is very different than the economy I grew up with. And I think most of us actually here this evening. It's different and it's changing rapidly. And so preparing our kids for moving into that space, regardless of what their next steps are, to have what they need to thrive, I think is the most important thing. And that really was part of my focus. It's always part of my focus as I look at the bills that are coming through. Everybody has their favorite little things that they want to push, but really, does this move us forward? I think is really important. And do you want me just to continue on some of the things that I was looking at? Is that
let's let Senator Wilson introduce, and then we'll start to dive in.
Okay,
Senator Wilson.
Thanks so much, and I'm just so happy to be here tonight. And I am Senator Claire Wilson. I represent the 30th Legislative District, which is in the South King County area. But as Senator Wilson says, I do believe that I represent a much larger population than just that. And I sit as Vice Chair of Early Learning in K-12 in the Senate, and have always been an education proponent and also been working in the world of education. But in particular in the Senate, I have a particular focus in early care and education. So thinking about all those things that happen prenatally and what happens before children and families cross that kindergarten door. But also in our state, we define early learning as prenatal to grade 3 or age 8. So it's really around also the cross-system, cross-sector work that we do. I also will say really, really important is my role as chair of Human Services also in the Senate, because as we think about whole children and whole families, many of our young people are in state care. And so we also have to think about education systems and how we're interacting with not only families, but individuals who may be stepping in and, leading really the journey of young people through that educational pathway. So those are really two really important things as we move forward.
Awesome. How about some highlights on some of your bills that you they're being signed? Didn't some just get signed today, as a matter of fact? Like, do you want to talk about some of the bills that you both were successful in getting passed this session?
well, for me, this particular session really focused a lot on the finances of our schools. It's changed dramatically. We have reduced the number of kids in our schools. And so there's been that shortfall of monies going out, but the programs still have to be fully funded. And additionally, we have, as far as the schools are concerned, the ESSER money that we have, for those who don't know, during our COVID, we had a lot of federal funds that came in, and that funded a lot of interesting different things across the state, but a lot of them funded some new programs. Once that money went away, but they still wanted to keep those programs going, there was really a challenge. So a lot of the things that I was looking for was to fund. Now, I will say I'm going back again next year because we are not doing our duty, in my opinion, as this being our paramount duty. Education in our Constitution, thank goodness, is our paramount duty of the state. And that means that we have to really step up and fund what we're supposed to be funding. So we did make some progress. We did get some additional funds for our paras. The para educators are the additional people in our classrooms that provide one-on-one training, one-on-one education, one-on-one support for the teacher, and are really, they're skilled, they're trained, and they're really an important part of our education system. So enabling additional paras was one of the things that we got through. And then we got a little extra money for special education, which, as you know, we would have said a number of years ago, not too many years ago, that percentage-wise, it was about maybe 13% of our students need that extra special education. Now the federal government is saying that the number is more like 17%. And that's a significant number. And I think that has a lot to do with the understanding of the scope of autism in our population. But we've managed to get some more funding in that place as well. So that was one of the major things. And of course, the other one that I was going after was to make computer science a requirement for graduation. And I do that as someone who was, as you know, my career and background was in tech. We are one of the number one, I think we are the number one state in tech on a per population basis. And no matter what the jobs of the future are, whether it's farming or automotive or whatever, there is a strong component of technology. And I want everyone leaving school to have that basic knowledge and feel comfortable with technology. So I didn't get my bills through. I didn't get that one through, but I think it's an important one. And just to let you know that it was based on competency. I think what we're finding is you don't necessarily have to take a course in high school. A lot of our kids right now, if you go into the elementary schools, the K through 6 schools, they're doing coding with little robots in kindergarten, first and second grade. So if you have what you need by the time you get to high school, you shouldn't have to take a course. And so we want to integrate a lot more things like financial literacy and technology in our lower grades as well.
Before we get to Senator Wilson to talk about your bill, Senator Wellman, let me just ask you a question about the funding, because I was reading an article today about, granted, these are people's opinions. I don't know if this is actually true or not, but that we here in Washington State have high spending on our education system and weak schools. And so how do you correlate the spending or the amount? What was the number I looked at? $18,354 per pupil in public schools. Is that correct? Is that still the right number? And how do you correlate if you're asking for more funding, but we're slipping down the rung on how strong our school system is? How do you reconcile that?
Well, first of all, a lot of the funding that I'm talking about is, for instance, for transportation. It is required in our state. Transportation is part of general education. And so we're supposed to pay for it. And in point of fact, we're probably $500 million short in terms of how much money we are not paying for. Also, as you compare our state to other states in terms of what the state pays for, in some states, the school district raises its own money and it can put in whatever it wants into the school system and completely pay for the local schools. So in some states, the state pays practically nothing for education, whereas we take on a whole lot of other things, for education. And we have seen very recently, I can go through, MSOC are the operations costs of schools. We have seen in 4 years, insurance costs double, having nothing to do with any particular cases of insurance or whatever, just the cost of that, the cost of electricity, the cost of running the school buses for the price of gas. Those costs have just skyrocketed, and that is accounting for a lot of the numbers that I'm talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, can I add something too? Just as a former educator and administrator, I think the challenge is just to speak to what Senator Wellman just said, is not all that money goes to instruction or to the actual students.
Right.
Right. And we live in one of the most expensive, just cost of buildings are just so much more expensive here than in other states. And so it becomes kind of apples and oranges. And I think my challenge is how are we even measuring success in schools? So it's a big challenge. If I were running for state superintendent this year, this would be something that I'd be challenging, because I think we often measure how we're doing based on a state test. And I think that's really problematic, having worked in really poor communities my whole career. Beauty and thriving is not represented on a test.
Yeah.
And there's so much great work that's happening across the state of Washington that doesn't end up being reflected in this test. We have more students coming from more places in the world who are learning to speak another language, and who come to us speaking 3 or 4 languages already, but that doesn't get reflected in a state test. And so I think one of the things that I have seen in America since I didn't grow up here is we pull dollars when the test scores aren't where they should be. And so we end up penalizing the very students and staffs who are working the hardest with the least amount of resources.
Thank you for that, Erin. I think people are not really necessarily aware that in my local school districts, for instance, we have over 100 languages in one of our schools. That reflects a wonderful cultural, a little bit of a lot of things, and hopefully we celebrate the fact that, but it's hard to do that. It takes a lot of support. I think it's really, people don't necessarily understand that while some of our youngsters within a very short period of time are speaking the language, that doesn't mean that they can learn in English.
Or communicate what they know.
Yeah. Yes.
So oftentimes they know a lot.
And they're not widgets. These are not widgets, and it isn't about, you can't do it with half a door or half a teacher. You either have a teacher or you don't have a teacher. And as we think about what young people need, even if there is one child less in a classroom, do we do without a teacher because of that? No. It is not like we're on a factory line. And that's the other piece, is it is you can't budget that way. Woo, makes me kind of a little crazy.
Senator Wilson, do you want to continue on and talk about some of the work that you're doing in the legislature?
Yeah, I was going to say one of the, biggest things we've been able to do in the last 3 years is really, since Fair Start for Kids, is make a huge dent in the work we're doing around early care and education and childcare, and thinking about, again, all those things that we need to do to support families before they ever cross that kindergarten door. And this last session, we were able to add another $115 million into our early learning system. And it feels a little strange, because for 30 years, you'd have to go down every session and just beat on people's doors to get even 1 ounce of change. And because of Fair Start, and because of the fact that we put within the legislation automatic increases over the next 7 years of that legislation, our advocates don't have to spend so much time coming down every session to ask for just a pittance, and they can really focus on things that will make a difference systemically, which is what we've been able to do around, investments in provider rates, reimbursements, expansion of access for young children and families in our state-funded pre-K programs, and also increasing rates for infants and toddlers, which we know was a huge issue, off-hour care, all of those things we've been able to impact. I also will say a lot of the work I've been doing has been focused on, again, the whole child as we think about K-12. So one of, I think, our biggest pieces of legislation really didn't sit in education, but sat in human services. And that's our extended foster care bill that we just passed, that extends care for young people 18 to 21, so they are not exited out of care into homelessness and into the very situation that create the challenges that we're seeing communities and our young people face right now. Did a bill around accessing ID for young people as well, and increasing who can sign for state ID, for driver's license, for motorcycle, because it has been very limited. And therefore, again, what can you do and how can you do things without ID? And we're putting young people in a position of having to be challenged, accessing those things. Also was able to work on Pell and having all of our institutions now and incarcerated individuals have access to federal Pell grants, which became an opportunity in 2022. And so have been working on systems which will, again, so we think about our juvenile rehabilitation goes up to 25. So we have young people that are in K-12, but also those that cross that system and need to be and able to continue their education post 12th grade, and will have access to the same kinds of things, the Washington College Grant, all those other things that young people need to have in order to kind of start whatever kind of educational journey they're on. Also have increased apprenticeships for young people and tied that with labor and making sure, as we think about our correctional industries and those programs young people and institutionalized folks have, that they actually exit with a living wage job and something that allows them to come into a community as they would like to be. And that's a contributing member. And then also we have a wonderful program called the Residential Parenting Program at the Women's Prison in Purdy. And that is women who are within 18 months of release, but have their children while they're incarcerated, are able to live with them there in the J unit and really have support, and was able to change the reentry to align it with the other kinds of graduated reentry programs. So individuals with babies didn't have to decide. They would rather choose a faster way out without support for their children and their families. And if we align it, then they can make a choice that meets their needs. And that now is an opportunity for a greater number of people as we think about whole families, we think about multi-generational trauma and all those things that will impact the future for so many of our young kids. So, and then the only thing I'll say that we did not, and we're going to keep moving on, and that's isolation and restraint. Rep. Callan and I have been working on that 2 sessions in, and again, we're not able to get it across the finish line, and we'll continue to work to make sure that we are doing our best for our young kids in our system. So that's where I'll stop.
I would just like to jump in, and we don't talk about it as we're talking about education, but if we think that how families are doing, how parents are doing, doesn't impact their kids, I'll tell you, you're wrong. We have a society right now. We've taken the middle class and we've just pushed it down, and the guy on the line is just not getting enough of a shot, and parents are stressed. And you have a lot of people who are working jobs they may not even like, but that's the way they get health care, and they want to provide for their families, so they're stuck. And so we've got to look at our entire society and what we're doing about where wealth is and where it is, hiding out, and where it needs to be for a healthy society. I think that really is key to what happens in education.
Senator Wellman, I want to add to that, because this is something that I know Cindi and I have talked a bit about. I grew up in the Netherlands, and it's a social democracy. So healthcare, schooling, all of it taken care of. People are taking care of their jobs. If you lose a job, you get retrained, get into another job. And when I came to the United States for college in 1989, the pro-life movement had just hit high gear. And I remember hearing someone talk about pro-life, and I said, wait, if you don't care about the families after the kids are born, and you don't care about the mother before she's had her baby, it doesn't feel like you care about life. And so this is something that I've really wrestled with for a long. I just really struggle with people who call themselves pro-life, who then don't seem to care about the life after it's come onto the earth. And it's part of the reason that I worked in the highest poverty schools my whole career, because I saw that as my way to be pro-life. Is I've got a point, but my students were coming without food. They were coming with housing that was unstable. They were coming from communities that didn't have public transportation that was reliable. They were coming from communities where there were not livable wage jobs. And I wish we would have more conversations about that, because we can't just say, pull up your bootstraps if you don't have bootstraps.
No.
Let me add, or let me ask this. It's a little bit of a shift in the conversation a little bit, but what was going through my head as I'm listening to you all talk, when you look at the funding of public schools over the last decade, the funding has doubled, more than doubled, right? And when you look at graduation rates, so I'm going to bring this back to, I'm going to take it to, let's talk about communities of color here for a second, because Senator Wellman, you're out of the business world and out of the computer science and tech world. This is the hub of it here. And so, I'm still wrestling with the question I asked at 8:07, which is around if we're continuing to funnel money into a system that is not graduating diverse kids at a rate that puts them in a position of prosperity and earning power, not just coming out of the system into a job and getting stuck, but actually helping the whole person, as you're talking about. What is it that we need to do in order to, I'm looking at, average teacher salaries. I don't know if this data is right. If a teacher's salary is $100,000 a year, I'm not understanding where the disconnect is, because maybe you can explain, where is the disconnect happening with graduation rates versus money that's coming into the system that is being paid by levies and property taxes and all that sort of thing. Help us with that. And that's our talent pool. Those are the people that go into these organizations. And here in the state where the hub is, we're ranked 31st out of 50. So how do we deal with that? Like, is that not your areas in the Senate, or are there other people who are focused on that sort of?
But I would also, would you not, Senator Wellman, wonder about where's the data coming from, and who are they looking at, and what are they using as their measure? And, as a school board director for 8 years in Federal Way, I have a very different think about our young people. We just had a STEM Expo, and there was over 4,000 families and kids with over 120 providers of all kinds of STEAM activities for young people. And I dare say most of those parents would say their kids are doing quite well. I often wonder sometimes who's speaking and what are we using as a measure? And when we have diverse communities, are we engaging young people in wanting to learn and wanting to continue their educational journey? And Senator Wellman, we talk about that a lot, about making sure that schools are, places young people see as relevant and responsive to kind of the current day. Sorry to jump in, but these kinds of things. It's like, who's saying that? It's just like you're saying schools are failing. But what else, where else do we have to have a 50+% passage rate for something to say we're okay? 60%, that kind of stuff is just.
Well, Aaron, you're in the schools. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm also the mom of a computer science guy who's got an MFA in mixed media, Black kid. So I think the challenge. I don't think the answer is always in policy. I think it's in the will of a community to want change, right? And so I think part of the reason I do the work I do, working with superintendents and school boards, is so much of that comes down to the school board, as Senator Wilson knows. And that's how we became really fast friends, was during the time that you were on the school board. And I think so much of the policy at the state level is about money and finance at big, high level. But when it comes to what are teachers doing in a community, that is school board, and that's superintendent, and it's what's the culture. And that's where I see my responsibility as someone on the outside of the system to push and helping families navigate. I'll just share, there's a project I'm working on right now with Washington STEM, where we are gathering all educators and community providers of tech and STEAM communities. We're gathering all leaders of color who are in that arena and supporting those adults so that they can more effectively support the students. And we are holding regional convenings. We're holding a statewide convening. And I think so much of the work is about supporting those people. The last thing I'll say is, Cindi, when you and I and Senator Wellman and Senator Claire were all in school, you didn't actually have to serve every child. You
You didn't have to what?
You didn't have to serve every child. You could let children depart the school district. And so I think another reality for us right now is that we have an obligation now to teach every single child. We have an obligation to make sure that every child moves through the system. And that's not how public schools were designed originally. It was like, okay, if you are not going to want to study, you don't want to show up at school, goodbye, we'll see you later. And we were fine with that. We as a culture were fine with that. We're not anymore. And so I actually think it's a really good thing that we're saying, we're holding ourselves accountable to, we've got to get to a place where 100% of our children are involved and engaged. But we also have to be willing to talk about things like race and racism and how that's showing up. We have to be willing to talk about curriculum and who gets to see themselves in our history textbooks and which books are we reading in literature classrooms and who has access.
And Erin, you know how proud I am of really some of the bills that we actually did get passed this
session.
To really make sure that the history that you read reflects the history of the peoples of our state, of our country. Very frankly, we haven't had that. And we know, and I can tell you because I spend an awful lot of time with our tribal compact schools, if you can't see yourself reflected, being seen and being appreciated, you just don't do as well. You don't feel, you're not engaged. And engaging our students is where education really has to start. And that's one of the things also that we're doing in terms of, sitting in a room with somebody at the head of the room talking to you and reading a book is not necessarily education. It's getting through a process, but it's not necessarily engaging students, getting them to be critical thinkers, getting them to understand things in a way that helps them move forward. And so I think we're involved in a very positive transformation right now, getting kids to recognize that some people are experiential learners. They are not just auditory learners. You sit there, you hear, and you're supposed to absorb it. It doesn't necessarily work that way. And so we are really transforming the system as we go in very helpful ways.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question about that, Senator Wellman, because, we've had, so here's one of my fireball questions. Okay, I'm just warning you. Okay. We've had other elected officials on the show who I don't quite remember the positions, chair of the education or whatever. And, they've made public comments about when speaking about brown and black children that not every student is designed to be able to critically think. And it flared up. I was one of your colleagues. And so my question to you is,
somebody got on?
I have the show still. So, when that is said, it sends a message to our community, brown and black community, that elected officials are believing that, black folks are just dumb folks and not everybody. And these are folks that speak on our behalf down in Olympia. So when you talk about transformation, I guess I'm just echoing. I'm really hoping that that's happening in Olympia, because if we have elected officials making those points about kids, whether she understood what she said or not, I can tell you the backlash from it. My phone blew up for 2 weeks after that.
As it should have. It should have. That is horrific.
Yeah, it was horrific for us to hear. And so that's,
oh my goodness.
This is why I want to continue to do have these kind of conversations, because we need our elected officials to help transform this system and not see everyone as, just don't have the capabilities or.
Additional point, we can have a whole discussion about, especially with what's happening in our world today in terms of technology. We're going to have a discussion about whether the 4-year, and I remember the governor saying, maybe when he first started, if you don't have a 4-year college degree, you're not going anywhere. And that's just BS these days. In fact, we're looking at a BA degree, kind of, is that really going to do it for people with AI and the technology?
Well, that's a debatable issue
But I
because
think braiding, looking at braiding education, what you need for when you need it. I'm on my 5th career. I expect that that's more like people going forward today than people 40 years ago who said, I've got this job for the next 50 years, I'm set. Nothing is remaining the same. It's evolving, and we need to educate our kids to be those critical, each and every one, in the way that they best learn.
I will tell you, coming out of the business world, having the degree, whether I believe I made some introductory comments about that, because whether I agree with it or not, it is how selection is being made and doors are open for people and opportunity. And so it is a fine.
I think we're at that point where, when I see what some of these young people are doing, of all colors that they're doing, I have one young woman in my local school district who is interested in languages. It's lovely. She's looked at a number of her school friends and realized that there were many kids who were coming in from unserved languages, especially in her particular case. She is translating 5 different African dialects into English so that those kids can be reading books and understanding them. Those are the kind of kids we have today who are doing amazing things.
I just go nuts, because I think also we just had an issue this session with Scholar Voice, and I had a bill to have graduate students, undergraduate students, have a vote on a professional education standards board, 12-member board, adding 1 additional voice. I'm not upset about this one at all. And to be told that they don't, basically, they can't make any decisions, and no, it has to be advisory, and they can't be a current student. Are you flipping kidding me? What is it that we're afraid of, right? I also think about intersectionality, and I think about, when we think about equity, and I think about, not only our Black and brown kids, but those that also identified. When we think about LGBTQAI+, when we think about Two-Spirit, when we think about fluidity, when we think about gender nonconforming young people, that's who are in our schools. And so if we are teaching as if we're in the 50s, we're going to have empty seats. And that's exactly, what we're doing. And I think the difference for me in the Senate is we're able to use the words and talk about it. But I still have to convince 48 other senators and 98 representatives that it's the right thing to do. And the only other thing, as I'll say, is everybody went to school.
They think they know.
Only thing in the world everybody's an expert on. Mm-hmm. Everybody went to school. So everybody has an opinion about what should be, what worked for me, how we should be doing it. Nobody is looking really reality-wise at what our children are saying that they need, because they're speaking very loudly. And, we also, every session, have at least 3 or 4 bills that are scholar-written bills. We have young people that are brilliant. We need to get out of the way. I walk with privilege, and I know I walk with privilege, and I use that privilege every day, not to be a voice for others, but to create a space at the table. But I also identify myself, and I can choose to walk in a room and disclose. And people need to understand so many individuals have not that same choice. And that is, continuing to put our systems in a place that were created never to get people out of them. They were created to keep people right where they were. Mm-hmm. And, as a disruptor and one who has been trying forever to be someone to change that system, I think, that's my job, is to change that from the inside out, because so many folks have been trying from the outside in for so very long.
Let me also say,
Any on the screen right here, Ms. Erin Jones. So just
I
Well,
also am very, very fortunate in that I was able to have, you get to do certain things as chair. I was able to have two vice chairs because when Twana Nobles came to the Senate, I was lovely. It was lucky to have her. She sits on her school board and she has an experience that I need sitting at the table with me so that we really, if you're not at the table, you're not there making the choices. You're not there making the decisions and having, kind of that diversity, that experience, lived experiences when we are making these decisions, when we're having these discussions, has just been such a gift for me.
that's awesome. That's good to hear. Listen, we've run over the time that I committed to holding you, so I apologize to that. Is there anything you want to say? Like, is there a particular something that you didn't get past that you're hoping you can get through next session, or is there something on particular on your mind that you want to make sure? Go ahead, Senator Wilson.
something. And, you may not even know about it, but it's the parental rights bill. That was the initiative that we passed. And I think it's really important to me that people know that as a Senate, but also as an individual and as a committee, really keeping our eyes and our ears open to make sure that young people continue to know that our public schools and our schools are a safe place for them to be. And that one of the reasons we, passed that initiative was to be able to come back immediately, whether it's a special session or regular session, if we find that there are things happening in school districts that are harming young people. And so it was a very difficult decision for me. And I know for the members of our LGBTQ caucus from both chambers, but felt like it was the right thing to do. We didn't want to bring fear to young people. And 90% of the things within the initiative are currently state or federal law already. And so there's a bit of ambiguity, and those are the things we'll be keeping our eyes open on. So between that and then again, isolation and restraint are really the two areas for next session, as well as the ongoing work in early learning for me.
Awesome. I really appreciate that. Thank you both for coming on. I do want to mention to our audience, Senator Wellman, it's you that's up for re-election right now, correct? Yeah. So you're, do you have a particular website that you want to direct people to? Or are you in the process of?
I'm in the process of putting it together. Thank you very much for just mentioning it. Yeah.
Yeah, please keep us. We're happy to post that for people to be able to donate to you. But we really appreciate the both of you coming on this evening and giving an overview to the community about the work that you're doing. Thank you for serving our children and making sure we are progressing all of our kids. Any final thoughts for the senators, Erin, that you want to say?
No, just I appreciate you both. I've had the opportunity to sit in sessions with both of you, and Senator Wilson knows this already. Like, Senator Wilson's come to my class with my students to listen to their voices, and I think you both expressed this, but part of the reason I ran for state superintendent is I think there are really great people who are in decision-making roles who just don't know how to represent the voices of the children that I most care about. And so even though they're really great people, because they make decisions that sometimes actually cause harm. And you two are people that I really appreciate the way that you keep your ear to the ground and you're open to hearing from community and learning. And I think that's what I so admire about both of you and really value.
Wow. Thank you, Erin.
Well, thank you both for joining us tonight. We're so grateful for the both of you.
Anytime.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. That was a great conversation, Erin. Did you think?
Yeah. But those two, I mean, as I said, they really care about this work, and they may not always get it right. I mean, I love how Claire opened at the end or finished by saying, hey, we may not have gotten this thing right, and I own that. I mean, I think that's what I want from lawmakers is like that transparency about we're not always going to get it right. And hey, I may not have done the work I needed to hear. You don't often hear that from lawmakers. It's always, I did it and they stopped me, instead of man, I had other things that I could have done, or I'm going to keep watching this because we didn't get as far as we wanted to. So yeah, I just appreciate both of them.
And that they listen,
Yeah.
right? Like there's a whole different, I mean, there's just some folks you interact with that just won't even hear
Mhm.
what you're trying to say. And so I know I feel the same way, like grateful when you have, I think, did you hear me last week when we brought Senator Cooter on when I said I'm selective about who I bring on?
Yes.
I'm not bringing on all the competition and all because I'm trying to bring on the people that actually represent the values of what we need to have in our communities and who are advancing. They don't have to look like us to
Right.
make progress. And so it is, I'm really happy about that too. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's, you're in the schools a whole lot more. I hear a lot of the language I hear a lot is about, that's where I was kind of pushing on the funding a little bit about the, money spent versus, what's happening or talent pools and all that sort of
Right.
stuff. And I don't even have a sense yet. I haven't gone through it. See, when is the filing deadline? It's in May
May.
of
Yeah.
who's going to start filing and competing, and what I think Senator Wellman had said before we came on, that the makeup of the Senate is changing. So it's going to be interesting to see if we can continue on with progress.
Yeah.
Because I do think we've made quite a bit of progress, at least in the 6 years now that I've been following politics. So
Right. Right. We
yeah.
have more Black and brown folks for sure in both the Senate and the House, which
Mhm.
is a great thing. And somebody like Tawana Nobles, who was a teacher for me when I was an administrator, just having people like that who really understand the work and are bringing their lived experience to the work and
Mhm.
are staying connected to their community. I'm seeing more of that today than I saw 15 years ago when I started working at the state office. And it was like everybody thought they were the expert and they didn't have to listen to anybody else.
And then with we're going to schedule some folks to come in to talk to us about the OSPI position. Is there any, do you have any feedback to share with the community about
Sure.
the effectiveness of what that superintendent has or has not done? And should we be paying attention or looking to unseat him? Do you want to
So,
talk about that?
yeah, okay, I've got lots of thoughts, and obviously, I ran for that office before and lost by 1 point, so I did really well in that race. But having watched from a distance, here's the difference I think between the two candidates that right now I am promoting really heavily. Vincent Perez and Reed Saris are running for that office right now, and then Chris Ragdoll is running to be reelected. It's not that Chris is a bad guy, but he's not an advocate either. So there's a real big difference. I think Reed and Vincent are advocates. They are advocates for equity. They're advocates for mental wellness. They're advocates for making sure we have greater diversity in the teaching force. Vincent is a man of color, and Reed is somebody who started a foundation to make sure that we were getting as many Black and brown students access to advanced placement and getting to college. So all the things that Wellman and Wilson talked about, like both of these men have done this work for decades. And so people should care about OSPI. A lot of times people do not vote for that office. So I know when I ran for office, over 3.5 million people voted, and not all 3.5 million people filled out that part of their ballot. And so we need people to care and pay attention. We will have Reed and Vincent on the show because they're people that I know have a track record, not as politicians. They're not politicians. They have a track record as educators. And I really have a firm belief. It's why I ran. I thought we need an educator, a career educator in that role who could really advocate for education. Now, the reality is that OSPI is not, it's not really an advocacy role. It's the pass through of federal dollars and state dollars. However, I really believe that role could be used as a bully pulpit to really advocate, could be used as a role to work with legislators to really develop policy. And so I think what's going to be different about these two gentlemen is they are they're activist leaders. They are people who are really connected to community, and they are going to want to build relationship with politicians in order to get the right kinds of things passed, in order to support students, their families, and educators.
Well,
And I really believe that's
this is
answer.
part of why we do this show, right? Is to help, like when you said people aren't, even like Senator Cooter, like nobody,
Right.
I
Nobody
didn't know about
knows.
it. You don't know this stuff if you're not
Mhm.
heavily immersed in
Mhm.
it, nor do you know what they're responsible for. So,
Yeah.
I think a lot of things I've just started to dig into it since we ran, to try to understand where power is and who's actually has the influence and power to make changes. And so you get to start to see and you start to understand how the system is structured, and then
Mhm.
who we need to have. And so it's behooves us to bring on folks. So if we are not seeing progress, and the current person is not, I don't. It's not my space. You're in the education
Yeah.
space. I don't swim in it like you do, but I don't hear
Yeah.
anything from him. I don't read anything about any work coming out of that office, and I tend to do a lot of due diligence for our shows. So I just don't know if he's effective or if he's another long-term politician. So
Well, and I think, I want to be really careful here how I say this. I think he has been really clear that he's been a politician for over 20 years. So he's very clearly a politician. And
mhm,
he was very clear about that when he ran too, that this is like politics is his thing. Being a bureaucrat is his thing. And I don't think I don't think that's a bad thing. However, I think this office deserves an advocate. I think
mhm.
because we are where we are as a state, we should not be 30 anything. Like our state should not be in the bottom half, period. And
Yeah.
so I think we need somebody in that role
Well,
that
that's
will really
why.
fight for the
Yeah,
West.
that's why, part of a little bit when Senator Wilson responded, like, well, who's giving you the data? Well, let's just suppose it's correct, right? Like, let's just
Hmm.
say that this statistic, I was doing research on it today. Let's just say it is correct. How do we reconcile that? Because we didn't actually get an answer to that. And I think that's it's an important issue that we have to ask, because we're expecting levies and property taxes to pay for this. And so the public does deserve to, your scorecard in any business is your results versus, so it's a fair question to say, okay, if you're funding this more and more and more, which I don't have an opinion that we need more or not. I don't understand. I saw all the different areas that they're spending money in. Some of the things that the data that I pulled, you know, it does make you question stuff, because, when you see if this data is correct, that the average, teacher's average pay is $100,000, not including a 35% benefit load. So that's $135,000 a year, and teacher salaries. And they work 9 months out of the year. So
No,
this is,
they do not. Nope. I'm
well,
stop you right there. I'm gonna stop you right there.
they
I want to
don't.
be
Go ahead.
because I was a teacher and my husband's a teacher. So technically you get paid over the 12 months, but you were in a classroom for 9 months of the year, but no good teacher is just working 9 months. I have never
Okay.
met a good
That's
teacher who's
fair,
working
but the
9 months.
wage is actually fair from a competitive salary. And so if you're a business person looking at that and you're seeing that your graduation rates are not where they should be, and you're asking for more money, no C-suite is going to put more money in a budget when your results are not measuring, they're not,
Yeah.
meeting par. And so that was more the point I'm making, is that,
Yeah.
right? Like, so that's
And
to me.
here's where I'd push though. The last and this goes across the nation. So I'm in schools all over the country now. Um, Schools across the country right now, it is hard to be a teacher right now in response to COVID. Kids are really struggling to focus. When you have a phone in your hand and you can just scroll and be entertained for 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. It's so what we're asking teachers to overcome right now with all of the anxiety in students and all of that is just a lot. nationwide. And I think there's so many things I want to say. $100,000 a year on average is a little wonky, because what happens is districts like Everett and some of the districts, Seattle and North, where the price of housing is more expensive, those districts are getting paid a lot more than if you head south to Olympia and south. And so I have a lot of friends who are making $60,000 a year. And when you have 4-year degree plus a master's degree, so you could have 7 or 8 years of a degree, and you are not just working 40 hours a week. Literally, I don't know anybody that works 40 hours a week.
It's the same issue that it's not just teachers that face that. Like, there is no, you talk to anybody in any organization, they're working over 40 hours and 50 hours a week,
Mhm,
and they're all dealing with the compression issues around,
mhm.
regions and all that sort of stuff. And I think my whole issue is, if we're putting this money and we're asking for more money to come into the pipeline to help progress these things, then the output of it has to meet.
Needs to be better.
Right. It has to meet the
Yeah.
threshold of the funding. That's the only point I'm
Yeah.
making. And so,
Yeah.
you're just going to get too much pushback from, no one's going to just want to continue to bleed it when, and then I'm not defending the business world in terms of agreeing 100% that talent pools and all that sort of stuff. But when you look at how we rank in a global majority world, we're going down. And so we've got to reconcile that, because
Mhm.
when the whole state is going down and your kids are coming out of school, and then you look along racial lines, while we may be 31st in the state, guess where the kids of color are coming? And so, I mean, I just, you and I have different opinions about charter schools too. I just believe in the whole
Yeah.
private, focusing on, because we're not getting what we need. I didn't feel to go into that tonight because I had only asked them for 30 minutes tonight. But again, how do we get our kids that, our brown and black kids, at the same par and have the same opportunities? That's fundamentally the issue that I want to focus on.
And the last thing I'll say about this is, we fundamentally as a country have a problem with how we think about teaching as a profession. So again, I come from a country where teachers were seen as equal to lawyers and doctors and engineers. And we don't value teaching as a profession. We don't value teachers as a career. And so we don't value education as a country. And that is a really hard thing too, that until we change how we're even thinking about schooling, our Black and brown families often did not have great experiences for themselves in school. And so what do they tell their kids? Don't trust the teacher, right? So this conversation is so complicated. And it's why I'm on the road every day, because I've got to be talking to the decision makers about, y'all need to believe in your educators. You need to believe in your students. But then I'm also talking to the families about, like, how do we meet in the middle somewhere? This stuff is so complicated, and we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it at the national level. We don't talk about it locally. I hope when we have Reed and Vincent on, we'll be able to have it, because this is something Vincent and I talk about all the time. I hope we can have a really honest conversation about this with them when they come on.
So let's get that scheduled. I was looking at the schedule today, so I'll text you offline about that. Okay.
Perfect.
All right, Erin, I appreciate
thank you
being on here tonight. Yeah. To our audience, thank you for joining us this evening. And I hope you learned something from the whole conversation. We will continue to bring our elected officials on to have more conversations with us. Our next couple of shows coming up, we've got some folks out of the Kent area coming in to talk about building wealth through home ownership. So I'm looking forward to having them. We also have Joy Hollingsworth scheduled to come on here really soon. Then she's one of the new city council people. We're going to talk about reimagining Seattle. We are also scheduling having Representative Amy Wallen on, who's going to give us an overview of the business world in terms of decisions that were made in the legislative session with respect to business. So we have quite a bit of things coming up. And then, as Aaron said, we're also bringing in the candidates for the superintendent role so that we can hear from them. So together we will prosper. So we look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Half that up in sacks, I favor black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's black. Yeah. Yeah. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's black. Yo.